we'll let everybody, fill in. The tweet should be out here, posted on Outpost, TAO Times stream, talking about TAO Tailwinds with some of the best builders, thinkers, tinkerers in the ecosystem. How are you guys today? It's Friday. How do you feel?
Man, we feel fantastic. It's been a great week at Crucible Labs. It's been like Sammy and myself at least have been heads down on a bunch of different things. So, yeah, it's all good.
Yeah, it's been absolutely impossible to get a hold of Sammy the past 2 weeks, but I'm glad that he's alive, I guess.
Yeah, can confirm.
So if he's listening to this, Sammy, text me back. I miss you, man. He's been AFK in the group chat for like the past 2 weeks, so we're all thinking about him. Our heart goes out to you, Sammy. Arash, how's the week, man?
Good. Busy, very busy. A lot of preparation for Glitch Financial Beta, which will be really exciting to get out.
Big release coming up March. Birds are saying
earlier.
March. Earlier. Sick.
Brody,
Good
maybe
stuff,
like
man.
the best question is like, how are you feeling? How are you doing this week? You've been kind of active on the social media platform X. So what's up, man?
Yeah, man, it's been busy. I have been oscillating between how I think about the future and AI's impact and what crypto and AI and the convergence of the two actually mean, and thinking about all of these events that have occurred over the past week and trying to make sense of them. I mean, we had Trump launch a shitcoin. We had Trump launch a second shitcoin. We had Ross freed, which was like a huge moral and ethical victory for the space. We had the CBDC like pretty much banned from ever existing. We've got 500 billion poured into AI initiatives. So I'm just trying to kind of connect the dots between all these data points and figuring out what they mean. I was watching Black Mirror the other night too, and I watched the episode Metalhead. And it was the episode where there's just the robot. It's all in black and white. And there's the robot dog. And the robot dog, it's just an epic of the robot dog chasing the woman. And I'm thinking to myself, like, wow, the functionality and the features of this robot dog are basically one more Boston Dynamics demo away from achieving something like that. Like, back when Black Mirror...
Is that when they had the shotgun? The dogs had the shotgun?
Yeah. That's
very dark.
Very dark.
I remember that episode. It was horrifying.
Yes.
Yeah, that was horrifying.
But okay, so the point is, like, when you're watching this in 2022, when the episode dropped, you're like, oh, like, that's crazy, but that'll happen in 15 years. And then you're watching it in 2025 and you're like, oh shit, we're like 18 months removed from something like this. And I mean, when you kind of look at TikTok and these social apps and you look at the pump fund trenches, if you created a cinematic experience and representation of the pump fund live stream trenches and you showed that to people who are not in crypto, they would think that that was an actual Black Mirror episode. People burning themselves on fire until the coin gets to 1 million. People sitting on the toilet until the
it's cages. Like,
right.
Like weird shit.
Exactly. So my point is I'm trying to make sense. To answer your question, Seth, I'm trying to make sense of what all this stuff means. And I woke up today specifically super pissed off because we had all of these tailwinds and everyone is crying about price action and about, well, my coin is going to zero, blah, blah, blah. It's like, guys, I actually think that there's so much noise on CT right now. And there's a lot of fundamentally changing things that are happening within the industry that are setting us up for one of the greatest setups of all setups. So I'm here to hold this conversation with some of the other people who are building extremely high conviction in Bittensor, not only Bittensor, but the crypto AI ecosystem and the convergence of the two pieces of the technology, to talk about why you should be fundamentally bullish on Bittensor and the space at large. And I like hanging out with optimists and people who are trying to pioneer the future of the two most emergent technologies in the history of the world. And I don't want to spend time thinking about pessimism and pessimistic takes and people losing their asses on pump fund stuff and all that stuff. So long-winded answer to your question, Seth, but that's kind of where my head's been at the past week.
Yeah, that was my read too. And like maybe to that point, like Kel commented on this, but like someone created a new like great copy pasta today, and it was just like basically talking about the trenches and like how people just outside just will never understand what it is to be in the trenches and crypto Twitter and pump fund and these coins, because it is like it's a whole new world in there. So you do need to like balance like being in there to really understand what's happening in crypto, and then like come out and take stock and put it into context, whether that's within your own thing that you're building or just more broadly, like you're talking about, like thinking about 2022 stuff that's happening there to where we are today. So I totally feel you. And I haven't been this week, I haven't been in the trenches too much. So I feel like I've been maybe spared a little bit.
Yeah.
For better, for worse.
What a great time to separate yourself from the trenches, to be honest, and focus on the core tech. I mean, the price is such a lagging indicator of success within the ecosystem, especially Bittensor and TAO, which is why I wanted to have this conversation, because you guys are very much in the TAO trenches. And I admittedly have not been over the past like week or two, just because I've been trying to think more high level about the implications of all this stuff. So Arash, I guess like I want to kick it to you. Like, what's your take on those events that I kind of outlined that have occurred over the past week and the overall macro setup?
One, I think CT sentiment, like the core builders in Bittensor are probably not that vocal on CT. I just don't think they are. They're building, and there's more micro circles of conversation happening around implications of dTAO and what that's going to look like. James probably knows what I'm talking about. Like, we're just not like that. We're not all on CT. And so CT kind of becomes this bubble of a separate voice, which is more about price action and like temporary things that, again, it's a lagging, like the price action is lagging. I think that the innovation is far ahead. And I think that I was going to tweet this. It's just, maybe we need to be more active on Twitter. Maybe that'd be helpful, but it's, I feel that dTAO is nowhere near baked into price. Like, it's totally not there yet. And maybe people just don't know what to expect. But I feel like creators, like the people that are running SNs, know that dTAO is going to be a massive catalyst for TAO. And like, we are fully expecting that, and it to be a very, very competitive environment and very capitalistic, which I think will be, again, very good for TAO. So, it's things that Jake has talked about, like Cons has talked about, but it's maybe hard for people to see because they've been waiting for it and they don't know what to expect. But as like us doing the analysis and like how this impacts our actual businesses running on Bittensor, we are doing the analysis. Like, we are looking into like, how can we be competitive in this environment? I'm sure James is doing the same thing at Manifold. Like, we are trying to figure out like, how can we be the most competitive, or try to take as much market as possible in a dTAO world. Like, that's the most important thing, right? So we do the analysis, and we're not sharing that analysis out. Like, so maybe it becomes like a little bit of a bubble that is a separate voice that's being talked about on CT that's really not related to the reality of what's actually happening behind the scenes and how we expect dTAO to impact the price of TAO. So I actually kind of see, and I've mentioned this before on other calls, that like, I think that dTAO is more of like a BSC moment, like it was for BNB, but for TAO. I don't know if you guys remember, but like when Binance Smart Chain launched, it was like a X of price for BNB. Like, I think there's going to be a massive amount, in my opinion, of lockup, and we can go into that, like between the subnets and their tokens to attract buyers, right? To allocate funds into these tokens and to get holders. And the best subnets are the ones that are mainly able to attract those. So it's going to be a really interesting world. I think it's going to be very positive. But again, I wasn't on crypto Twitter, and I just logged on, and I'm like, oh my God, there's just like 4 posts in a row that are all negative towards TAO. And I couldn't believe it. Like, it's just the people not seeing through it. And so it was a little shocking. So I had to put something out there where I was just like, sentiment is all-time low, developments are all-time high. That's pretty much where we're at right now. So it's asymmetric bet, as many people commented. So
I love that. I was gonna just add, like, that's what sparked this whole conversation, was seeing Arash's tweet that he just said, and I was like, you know what? Screw it. Let's get after it. But James, go ahead.
Well, crypto Twitter is probably the worst place you could possibly get your information.
Yeah.
If by the time Virtuals was on crypto Twitter, that trade's done, right? By the time, TAO is whatever taking over again, that's probably an indicator that there's froth. And ultimately, these things trade on in the near term, one thing and one thing only, and that's flows. And from a flows perspective, today you've got what, 7,200 TAO emitted daily. So that's about $2.4 million worth of potential sell pressure. You have a ton of uncertainty where there's active technology in development. Therefore, it's impossible for anyone to know exactly how it's going to impact things, especially as it's being changed on the fly. So you have uncertainty in the market with retail. You have uncertainty with subnet teams. I've heard that some are extending their runway and cash. We're actually doing the exact opposite. We're very bullish on exactly what this is going to mean. We're selling very, very little, and you can look at our wallets. But this reminds me so much of, and I know Arash was there because I remember when it was Caro, Cons, myself, and a few other of the early developers, and you DM'd Cons and said, I want to build a subnet. And it was the first time ever that a new person had said, I want to build a subnet. And it was like the coolest thing. We were losing our minds. I think we probably had a shot. But at that time, no one knew exactly what was going to take place, right? And you remember the early subnets were so garbage, you couldn't even believe it. And now we have a subnet that we're very, very proud of. We're speaking with not just, we've worked with a few companies, Dippy being one of them, Taobot being another, Sybil being our product that's all powered by Targon. Now we're talking with others. And so as you said, Arash, fundamentally, it's improving. It's improving at a rate that I don't think many companies in the world can say, okay, on a week-by-week basis, this network is growing at a crazy pace. I won't ramble forever about flows, but you just got to think about the flows. And right now you're at max uncertainty. And the best time to go long is when the market is max uncertain. And additionally, from a flows perspective, in a dTAO world, right now you've got the 7,200 being emitted from the chain. If you assume any amount of movement from root into these different pools, which I think is a very, very safe assumption, then that number, that daily inflation number, is going to shrink all the way potentially to zero. So you're going to have excitement about a new launch and what it means. You're going to have deflationary tokenomics. And then additionally, a team like ours, a team like Arash, you saw another thing, because Brody, you started the call very well about just CT macro. And another interesting one this week was Vine, which that shitcoin traded at about $400 million when the business is worth $30 million. This doesn't make any sense. But you're going to have this same phenomenon occur within Bittensor. And so I very much think it represents a Solana. I don't use the word Ethereum anymore because no one likes it. It's a Solana moment for Bittensor. And I'm sure people are going to be building phantom-like experiences where you can trade in and out of these tokens, but they're not going to be shit coins like Fartcoin. They're going to be Targon and Subnet 8, which are real businesses.
That's amazing. And I would like to just, before we dive deeper into the actual fundamentals in the subnet tech and dTAO, which both of you brought up really great points about dTAO, and there's a lot of interesting economic aspects to dTAO that a lot of people are kind of missing because, again, there's so much information asymmetry within Bittensor because all the conversations are happening in Discord, all of the conversations are happening within Telegram chats, and there's no publicly distributed white paper about how dTAO is going to work because they're still trying to work on that and it's just still evolving as we kind of experiment with the RAW games and on testnet and yada yada. So there's so much information asymmetry, but before we dive into trying to clear the air around these asymmetries, I'd like to kick it to you, Seth, on the like zooming out again. Like we're looking at the beach. We're not only looking at the beach, we're looking at the particles of sand on the beach, right? Like let's zoom out and let's look at the globe. The globe that is the macro setup of AI and crypto sentiment with the United States government.
Yeah, that's probably a good point to dig into. And you brought some of this up at the beginning of this too. But yeah, I think you probably couldn't have much more of a bullish setup, even like from just like day one, what's happening. I think that's probably like almost planned, is to like start a huge rush of excitement with the new administration. So yeah, I think like the big macro plan is to make the USA the capital of both crypto and AI. And then like going down just one layer below, there's a bunch of teams, mainly starting on the crypto side, that are looking to figure out how these two generational technologies kind of meet, intertwine, and like bring forth all new economic and social foundations. Like these are huge events that we're getting to live through in our lifetimes. It's hard to even like find comparisons to this in history. So I'm totally with you. Like that's why like the week's price action on TAO just doesn't enter my mind right now. Like maybe at other times it would, but there's so many other, like whether you're like thinking about your daily work that you need to get done or like thinking about what just happened in the US, like there's just so many other things to be thinking about and get excited for than what's happening on CT and the price action.
Completely. Seth, you said, has there ever been a time in history where we've seen something like this? I don't think any of us were really alive in 1996.
No.
But in 1996, my dad tells me that he would go on to AOL, any of these fucking things, and it would be
Maybe
so
I'm
slow.
old.
Might be
Yeah, I was around for that, but maybe I shouldn't comment. No, I'm young.
That's a moment where you don't
times.
comment. But anyway, in 1996, he says he would sit there and the information would just be slowly dripping and he would wait because that information was so valuable. I have the same experience today when I use ChatGPT. It's gotten worse and worse. I mean, it's borderline unusable. This morning, I could barely use the thing, but I needed it. So clearly it's inefficient. Clearly it's not working. A network like Bittensor is a much more efficient use of capital because you bring up the U.S. government, 500 billion big ones, which first of all, they don't even have the money. If they did have the money, you got to ask, where's that money going to flow? It's flowing into data centers, but it's going to flow elsewhere as well. There's going to be some trickle down effect. There's going to be, if nothing else, some additional speculation into our network. This additional speculation will bring in more and more talented people. And Brody knows it well because he comes by our co-working space all the time, but we've got a pure play AI company. It's about to join us as early as next week. So what we're doing at Manifold is just continuing to bridge that gap. Like you said, everyone has said that these are the two most transformative technologies of our time, but they're very different. It's two very different skill sets. To have both, and now with dTAO, you're layering in financial markets. I mean, it's almost unbelievable. And so it's our job. There's a lot of information asymmetry, Brody, which I think we're going to get into. It's our job to reduce that because it doesn't matter what's being built if people don't understand.
Maybe like one other thing I wanted to point out, you brought up something that came to mind, like on the macro side too, on AI, we're starting to see, there's always been discussions on open source versus closed source or like these kind of closed source AI labs and what the competitive nature is there. And it seems like every week we get more and more reason to think open source is just going to eventually dominate, right? Like DeepSeek is probably the most recent one that has people excited. And it seems like people are actually trying out DeepSeek, which is encouraging. So I think you kind of combine that to what's happened on the crypto AI side recently with things like ELIZA and some of these like agent frameworks that have gotten attention. I don't think these things are necessarily like the best things that have ever happened in AI and crypto together, but it does like get people that are more on the AI side thinking about, okay, if it is coming to the point where I need to think about open source AI and models and how I'm going to exist in that world as like an ML engineer or ML developer, how am I like going to interact with these systems and these new ways of building this technology if I don't want to like depend on closed source models? Like, where do I fit into this? And I think you probably start going down the crypto rabbit hole. And one place you'll probably find yourself is looking at Bittensor and thinking about, what does that network look like? There's a lot of AI activity happening there. Like, what's going on? And you might not find it on crypto Twitter, which in my opinion might be the best thing for you if you're like seriously thinking about a long-term plan for yourself as like an engineer, someone wanting to contribute to open source. So that's been something positive, like Sammy and myself talked about recently too.
Well, definitely. And I would even say, to add on to that, Seth, and I'm sure you agree with this, Arash, the people who actually need to care about dTAO down to the protocol level, ultimately in the grand scheme of things is going to be pretty much everyone on this call, whoever's listening, and then whoever's developing, right? Maybe thousands of people, if that. The people you mentioned, the people who are worried, oh, where am I going to fit in this world? They will use our product. They will use Targon.com. They don't give even a rat's ass about what powers it. They just said, oh, wow, I can get DeepSeek tokens for free. That's fantastic. Let me sign up. Okay, now I can go scrape using subnet 13. We're working on integrating additional subnets because it's very, very important that you have a unified platform where people can easily go and say, okay, what exactly can I do here and how does it all tie up into one product? So 100% Seth. And when people freak out about dTAO, I think they have no clue how to really forecast the bigger picture, because ultimately it just really doesn't matter. Most people won't care.
I actually kind of want to jump into that, James. Like, I don't think people like really understand like the implications of dTAO and like how it'll be good for TAO. Like, I feel like it's like a lost thing right now. Like the impact to a subnet owner, right? Like what you're going to receive your token. There's going to be high visibility on that token. You're going to be able to dump that token. You're going to dump it on your holders. How are you going to handle investor relations, right? Like, it's like every subnet is going public in a way, right? And the pressure from other subnets and what they're doing is going to be a factor too, right? You're going to be compared against your peers, the other subnets. And so again, I come back to this capitalistic nature, the fact that there's going to be pressure on how are you utilizing your subnet ownership emissions? What do your tokenomics look like? How do you optimize your tokenomics? And how do you get more holders, like stakeholders of your token, right? And eventually all of that's locked up. That's locked up TAO essentially in your token. And you can imagine all the biggest subnets are all going to be thinking in this way. And this is why I'm saying that CT probably doesn't see what we're seeing, which is, wow, there's going to be a lot of locked up TAO. I mean, like, that's just the reality. Like, there's just, you're just, to be able to actually compete, you're going to have a real business model. You're going to have to act like a public company. You're going to have investor relations. There's going to be high visibility, and you better be locking up TAO. Like, that's the reality.
That is the reality. You're correct. I think that TAO will probably go through a period of price discovery once again, and then it'll stabilize. It'll stabilize because, like you said, people will be arbitraging the different subnets. That will be, in order to play that game, of course, you need TAO. In the same way that in order to play the Solana meme coin game, you need Solana. So we'll have that sort of effect. When you say investor relations, I've thought about this a decent amount recently. It's a gargantuan task to try to do everything that you're tasking a subnet builder to do. I think over time, if I'm looking at this network in 5 or 10 years, the subnet builder is creating a commodity. And then ultimately you'll have a bunch of different businesses plug into that commodity and develop the application layer using your technology. To ask someone to do both, you could have an organization do both.
It's hard. That's kind of what we're doing. It's really hard. Like, it's a lot.
Because it's two completely different skill sets.
It is.
You can create the thing and then you got to distribute it. Distribution in the real world is very difficult, but we're doing our best right now. And we have a large pipeline, actually. When you say free tokens, a lot of people say, how do I get in touch with you? But it's a new paradigm. I think the only thing we can say for certain, it's going to be a very fun next 3 to 6 months.
Yeah, each of these.
Sorry, go ahead, Seth.
Like all of you building these subnets are now going to be your own crypto networks. And I think that's like hitting people heavily as like I talk to other subnet owners. Like, we've all been sort of like in this TAO game, and it's been this very different model. Like, we've all been under this one umbrella crypto network. And now everyone's starting their own thing in a way, whether they like it or not. So I think it brings all those challenges, but with challenges, that's therein lies the opportunity. So that's the tailwind to me, is like, we're all starting it at the same time. And that's a huge tailwind coming up in the form of these new crypto networks. That's what's exciting to me.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if I had to summarize my excitement, it's like, all right, get back to what actually moves markets. It's flows. Flows are about to change dramatically in a very positive way. So it doesn't take a rocket scientist to think about what might happen. And then, yeah, it's all a game of distribution ultimately. And we must never forget that, like, the reason you as a developer would even join Bittensor in the first place, it's almost like joining a founder's venture capital firm, because the way Arash and I are bootstrapping our businesses is simply the 21st century. Yeah, if you say venture capital started in the 20th century, which I guess technically it did, but it really boomed kind of in the early 2000s. That was a good time to go seek out venture capital. You got great terms. Now it's been institutionalized to death. Bootstrapping I call it bootstrapping, but really we're taking investment from the protocol. Everyone who holds TAO is technically a board holder or a board member, at least in my opinion, right? Because if you hold it, we're inflating you, and the hope is that we will build we'll use the money wisely, build distribution, and value will ultimately flow back, because the network will be as valuable as the commodities that are produced within it, the intelligence that's produced within it. I think that I recently started watching the show Landman, and it's so cool. Brody, I think you would like it. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's about oil in Texas and the 1980s or whatever.
You and your
it is.
oil right now, dude. You're obsessed with oil. Every
It's a
time
commodity.
I see James, he always talks to me about his oil trades.
He's doing his commodity studies.
Go
his
on,
history
bro.
lessons
Go on.
before- Yeah.
Anyway, coffee is another commodity. It's a top 10 commodity. Intelligence it'll surpass oil as the number one commodity. So we're kind of in the infrastructure building phase right now, getting the rig set up, all of this stuff. And I would say Bittensor is like an infrastructure like investment. And by being a part of the network, you're kind of, you have exposure to a commodity that will likely be a lot more valuable. Seth wants to say something, which is perfect because I'm about to stumble on my words.
No, I actually like that. I need to do more studies too. But I wanted to ask you guys about that, like on the infrastructure side and like almost the economic side too. Like we've talked a lot about dTAO, but I saw something, Arash, you mentioned, I think in your channel in Discord, but how are you guys as subnet owners thinking about the EVM or like the smart contract layer and how that interacts with dTAO and like more broadly, like what are like new like economic relationships you can build between the three core participants, and then also like trying to attract new capital or just like new applications that are native to that smart contract platform. I'm interested in that.
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's kind of like some of the features that, allows us to kind of expand quickly on some of the features that we really wanted. Like there's better ways to allocate emissions to miners, to participants, enable more participants, right? How can we think about those two avenues are ways that we're kind of using the EVM for just S&8, right? That's really the way we've thought about it, but there's a lot of really interesting things that we're looking into beyond that. But those are the core ones. And then like a different payment method, like registration fee, for example, is a burnt fee. Like what if instead it was like a locked fee that could be returned or used in a different way, like a collateral? These are all different innovations that we want to be able to create and then provide for other subnets too. I mean, I think everyone. It's kind of like another layer of features that subnets can then implement to use and create better subnets, right? So
that's how I think of it too, is like, crypto, one of its core like value propositions is capital coordination, right? So this is like, and we've seen this, there's so many examples of how this works. And we're seeing it too, like on Solana, right? Like with a lot of these meme coin launches, it's teams that are like launching tokens. And as like an example, it might not be sensical in some ways, but it's like people are seeing the relationships you can have by token issuance and like coordinating capital for something you want to do. So I can even see this as like miners, right, that need to finance themselves in some ways. Instead of having to, sell off their alpha tokens that they're earning, maybe there's a different way they can finance themselves, and they have to kind of like go out and almost do like this marketing exercise or like give a value proposition for what they're doing and finance themselves that way. So things like that, I think that's like what the EVM or like the smart contract platform is for Bittensor. It's going to look a little bit different than like some of the more general purpose smart contract platforms that start out with like very basic DeFi protocols, although those are going to be built out too. It'll look a lot different because there's already participants like needing this functionality for very specific purposes for these core participants.
Yeah, I think it's really a scale layer. Like I think there's gonna be a lot of that. Go ahead, James.
I agree, and I think that something that's gotten lost recently, just because detail is becoming increasingly nuanced, is why the hell are we even doing this in the first place? And that's the most important question and answer, and it puts more power into the hands of individual TAO holders, moves that power away from the validator root network centralization. Arash knows it. I know it, right? It's a political game right now. It's going to be a less political game once dTAO launches, which is far away, more than anything else, the most important thing that's about to happen here. It's going to breathe additional life into the network. It's going to make it much easier for new participants to join. It's just overwhelmingly positive.
I don't think people really realize that how like dedicated Jake is to TAO. Like honestly, OpenTensor and Bittensor, like they've just done an incredible job planning. I mean, dTAO is a big thing to try to release. And it's really prioritizing TAO over everything. And he saw that like really early on. What was that? Late 2023, he was talking. Like he's been planning this for a long time, and he saw the issues that would arise. Yeah, I mean, when he said, I remember him saying that, dTAO is not good for miners, not good for validators, not good for subnet owners. It's good for TAO. It's really accurate. I mean, that's the reality of it. And now we, subnet owners had to react and plan accordingly over the last, 6 months to 9 months. And the teams that haven't been, I mean, are going to have a hard time. And the teams that have been will probably be able to take advantage. That's just the nature of it.
Seth, how are you thinking about dTAO and specific subnet tokens for the sake from a validation perspective and the investor perspective? Because I think dTAO introduces this game of every single person has within the ecosystem, within the community, participating in the network, they have to think about the capital markets strategy with dTAO. Whereas before it's like, oh, we're mining TAO, right? And we have this one variable. We either sell TAO to cover our burn in US dollars or euros or whatever, or we hold TAO because we're bullish TAO, and then we'll be able to sell that TAO at a later date to buy more things in USD or acquire more assets to acquire more TAO. But now it's like, especially from the validation side and the mining side, you have to kind of strategically understand which subnets are worth validating, i.e. which dTAO tokens are worth earning. Same thing on the mining side, figuring out, well, if we mine this subnet and we earn these dTAO tokens, do we sell these to acquire more dTAO tokens of this subnet? And it just introduces this entire variable with this multi-asset ecosystem or economy of trade-offs and opportunity costs between holding all of them. And this was something that Will was talking about back in the summer, was how do we plan our subnets and our business model around a multi-token economy, right? And I'm just kind of curious, with all the discussions that you've had, Seth, what's your perspective on that?
I think in a way, like I almost have like a much simpler job, or like the investor has a much simpler job than you guys building the subnets and working with the other two main participants. To me, a lot of this just goes back to understanding which subnets are valuable or going to generate value. And this is like from the existing subnets, right? Because whenever dTAO does launch, the cost to launch a subnet, which is extremely high right now, it's 6 figures, getting into 7 figures sometimes, that's going to decrease. So you definitely expect to see a lot more subnets coming up this year and into next year. So just for the existing ones, you have to do research and understand which ones generate value and are worthy of investments and could generate potential upside. Nothing new there. It's just doing your homework and staying off CT in a lot of ways, which is hard to do sometimes. So that's like the main path we're taking right now, is understanding which ones we think are valuable and then doing our best to keep up with the actual dTAO mechanism itself to understand, like from an investor perspective, how are we actually going to get into these subnet tokens? When do we want to get into them? And how do we think the market's going to play these? Are they going to, there's a lot of subnets already on Bittensor. Are they comparable to other networks out there in crypto or just in the Web2 world that have valuations or have tokens? Like that's probably, I think a lot of people are going to start there whenever they think about actually trying to put valuations on these things, is, okay, how can I comp this to something that I already know or that I can at least look at that exists to give me some relative basis. So I think that's probably like the two main things we're doing right now.
Totally. I think that another thing that's very valuable here that you touched on a little bit is historically, or in today's paradigm, subnet owners are not really incentivized to be very public, right? I mean, you don't need to be. Now, you're going to have to be public. So this will solve, you're much more incentivized to be public, So this will solve a lot of the press problem that a lot of people say Bittensor has, which in the way it's occurred, by the way, is very organic. And I know Brody is one of the healthiest people you've ever seen. He likes things that are organic. The story of Bittensor is an organic one. And so you're going to, like, Manifold's going to have to be a lot more public facing. That's something, we're all prepared to do. And I think Arash probably feels the exact same way.
Yeah, it's kind of what I was hitting on with investor relations. Like you have to go talk to your community. At the end of the day, there's gonna be all these like micro communities that end up forming, and the ones that end up the most like close to their token, right? Like if you can, as a subnet owner, get your token holders to drive forward your business, like the token and the business formed around the token and the creation of apps, right? And you can incentivize them to do that in some way, you're going to succeed the most, I think. So there's all these dynamics. It really is like everyone has their own chain kind of thing. And you gotta create those community. That community is going to be essential. So that's another thing. It's a lot of work. The onus is really on the subnet owner to drive a lot of stuff forward. But I kind of wouldn't have any other way for in terms of like if I was trying to increase the value of TAO as much as possible. Your subnet owners are the major stakeholders. They're driving forward TAO by having a bunch of investors lock up. They're creating their own micro communities that are, driving forward TAO as well behind the scenes, underneath the hood through this token. Like it's pretty ideal. Honestly, I really don't say this. I really think that dTAO is probably the most bullish thing that probably could be created for a cryptocurrency. Like I really don't know something that could be more bullish. And maybe, I don't talk as much about it as we don't as subnet owners talk about. But like if you really think about it, I really don't know an event that's kind of like that. Solana maybe with meme coins, but like I think it's a level deeper than that. I think it's even better. So
It's far deeper. I mean, if you look at crypto today, it's how are people making money? Like what's a successful recent protocol launch? Hyperliquid. They make money on transaction fees. So they're making money, sitting in the middle of some guy trading a piece of shit for a fucking pile of another piece of shit. This is not valuable in the long run. What Bittensor is about to launch with Dynamic TAO is truly once and for all the free market for this commodity, the free market for intelligence. And you can't hide in a free market. So the best ideas will win. Sure, there'll be like short-term arbitrage. It's going to be volatile. But in the long run, the best commodity that is produced that ultimately powers the most businesses and the most applications is going to drive the most value. And the reality is you probably only need one, like venture capital. If you hit one big winner, this network's so incredibly valuable that it'll shock a lot of people. And the one thing I'll add, because you mentioned how is this different from other cryptocurrencies, an under the radar thing within dTAO is the fact that I truly believe it can solve the Bitcoin transaction fee problem, the long-term incentivization issue that a lot of these chains have, because assuming a sufficiently valuable market, all you'll have to do is spin up a subnet, which it costs you next to nothing. And then it's your job to to bring on a good engineer. If you're a good engineer, then you'll come on. And then you make your money, you're incentivized via the inflation that occurs within the pool, the appreciation that occurs and inflation within the pool. So that is a long-term design decision that I don't think anyone really understands the implication of that today. It's very hard to try to see into the future.
Yeah, I think too, with like the whole copying of Bitcoin tokenomics, it only works in some rare occasions. Every single person that has tried to copy Bitcoin tokenomics has done it at their own detriment, except for TAO. I think TAO is the exception because it is the next manifestation of the Bitcoin, and in the fact that Bitcoin is incentivizing the aggregation of compute to basically secure a ledger for something that has an intrinsic store of value via scarcity. And Bitcoin or Bittensor is the next manifestation of that vision that's evolved to include a multi-incentivization network specifically for the production and the commodification of the new age intellectual commodity market, right? And Bitcoin tokenomics works. And I just wanted to touch on that point where everybody else has been trying to copy it and have failed thus far. But to the point on the long-term incentivization, it works in the favor for Bittensor.
100%. I think this is an argument you could make. And again, this is so early and it's even too early to declare Bitcoin a winner, right? In our little world, everyone's like, oh, Bitcoin's a winner.
I don't know. Bitcoin is Lindy, dude. Bitcoin is Lindy. I agree.
Yeah. It's hard to say though. Like that there's an argument.
What do you think? Okay, but have you thought? Okay, but you haven't thought about the implications of what Vine token mean for the digital economy. You don't think, dude? That was a banger, by the way. I'll have it say. I'll victory lap that one. Anyways,
I think your
go
point
ahead.
on like on the design of the dynamic TAO tokens, like following the TAO model, pretty much following the TAO model, and then also which follows the Bitcoin model, is actually like on point for like what people want in tokens at this point. We went through this whole phase of the low float, high FTP stuff, and that's because of the structure of that capital coordination of how that project and that token came to be, and that's fundamentally different than what you get with these subnet tokens as far as how the capital is coordinated for these things. And that's like, in some ways, that's a very rigid design that you as subnet owners walk into. But sometimes when you have these rigid designs, that creates the constraints that you need to like figure out how to make this. You have kind of the box that you get to work in, and so that kind of enables you, like you were saying, Arash, to figure out how to design the token for exactly what you need without having to recreate crypto economics or token design yourself. So to me, that's like another benefit from as an investor standpoint. There's kind of like less work to do in a way. Coming in, I understand this model and how to work with it, which kind of like checks one thing off of the list of things to do before getting into token.
I know we're starting to run up on time a little bit, but you mentioned rigid, and I would just kind of add on there. The beauty of Bittensor is that it's abstract, and you have effectively this large coordinated swath of compute, and it's your job to incentivize it accordingly. You have people, there's now an internal server at OpenAI dedicated to Bittensor mining. There's a large group, very capable people who are effectively at your beck and call. And if you can incentivize them correctly, you can do whatever the hell you want.
That's like something like Sammy and I talked about a little bit too, is like, and you mentioned it earlier, James, like early on subnets were kind of rough in a lot of ways. And that's because there's just these pioneers trying to figure out what the hell's going on and how to design these things. And that was, that feels like centuries ago, but that was like a little over a year ago that the subnet design came out. And you guys understand this very well. But that's a year. Like that is not very long to get to where we are now. And I think if you look at some of like the recent subnets that have launched, at least, these are companies that exist, and they've identified, okay, this is how I can leverage the Bittensor ecosystem and like the level of competency that like basically this set of miners has. Like Coinmetrics might even be a good example.
I was going to say that.
Yeah, Arash. So you can detail that out, but that's like something, a macro trend in like Bittensor just in a year that we've seen develop. And like, that's a very good bullish sign to me that people outside are seeing the properties that are emerging in Bittensor and saying, I can tap into this, or let me figure out how I can tap into this. And all these other teams have been working on how to properly create incentive design and like build the infrastructure. They will be there to help you out. Just like Yuma, for example, provides support in that way. And Crucible Labs in a way provides that too.
Yeah, I worked with Coinmetrics on SNA when I first launched the time series prediction subnet, which was Bitcoin price prediction. And it's so cool to see them like come on, take that same idea and then be like, hey, here's our data. It's kind of like and have them on board onto Bittensor. I think that's really cool. And I think we're going to see a lot of that. I think we're also going to see a lot of apps start to form, which I think James kind of alluded to, which is like the second layer, right? Taking these subnets, taking the commodities and building products. I think there's going to be a really big opportunity there. You may not want to be a subnet owner. It might be a lot of, I think at the end of the day, it's going to end up being quite hard. Honestly, I like the responsibility, the pressure, the competition. I think it's going to be quite hard to be a really competitive subnet. And I think there may only be like a few almost conglomerates on Bittensor that know how to do it and then have a certain structure and they like go at it that like really succeed. But we'll see how it goes. But I think that the opportunity is going to be on the layer above that, which is the applications. It's going to be using the commodities that are really, really valuable that come out of this and producing something that then is provided to a lot of people, which is kind of like we're putting that in our own hands really with S&8, but with Glitch Financial, which we're trying to enable to everyone. But I don't think every subnet is going to have to do that, right? They're going to have a layer that then is accessible, and then they can enable builders to go build. So I think it's going to be really fascinating. I think there's a really big opportunity there, and people aren't really talking about it. as much as they probably should, but that's going to be I think and Manifold's doing a great job at that. I think it's going to be a really big opportunity.
Well, that's like the two ways we see it happening too, is like you either have to go literally build your own application on top to kind of show people the way if you want more people to leverage what you built, or like with James and Manifold, you guys are going out and understanding what the market is for the commodity that you built and talking to teams and getting them to integrate. And like that just comes down to showing like we have a good product or a good service underneath that is literally a very viable product. And we will, especially in the early stages, we will walk you through on how to work with this team and work with the subnet, how to integrate properly. That's like the two paths we see going forward to kind of like build a full stack, build something that's full stack on top of Bittensor.
Precisely. And I'll use coffee as an example here because it's my favorite commodity, or second favorite. Intelligence is number one. But if you're a subnet developer, effectively you're growing green coffee, and then you're just going to have a ton of applications, ton of people who are bagging it, figuring out exactly how to roast it. What does the customer actually want? As long as you provide me sufficiently good green coffee, the explosion ultimately will be on the app layer, but a lot of value accrues because that raw commodity is incredibly valuable. So there's a lot for everyone to be excited for heading into this Friday afternoon, I would say.
That's incredible. Yeah, and that's a great point to wrap up on. Guys, thank you so much for joining. I had a pleasure hosting this conversation and facilitating it. And you guys are always invited to hop back on a stream anytime. You just send me a text, whatever you want to talk about. We'll run up another one of these. So thank you guys for joining. That was incredible.
Awesome.
I want to hear James's next commodity after this. We got coffee, we got oil. What else? Next time we jump on, we're going to have another one.
Oranges.
Oranges.
All right. It actually kind of sounds fun and like my nerdy interest, I guess. So maybe I'll have a good weekend project here to take on.
On the next TAO Time stream, we'll be talking about the coffee e-commerce company that we're going to create around James's Ruck Coffee. So until next time, thank you guys so much for tuning in. You guys know where to find us, taotimes.xyz/subscribe for all of the weekly updates within Bittensor and the subnets in the ecosystem. And we'll catch you next time. See you guys.
Thanks, Brody.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys.
We dropped